Good afternoon, I'm Pat Gottman. We welcome you, and we also want to introduce you to our senior pastor for those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet Dr. McConnell. I do want to mention that the Caregivers Pathway Resource Center will be open after this presentation. If you have any interest in seeing it, we have a few volunteers here today who would be happy to show you where it's at and what you can do there. So without further ado, Steve McConnell. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Welcome. So good to have you all here. And just let me give a shout out for the Caregivers Pathway room upstairs in the Education Building 202. It's such a beautiful, beautiful space, and it's just so full of resources that these good people, led by Pat and her team, have developed that you would really want to take advantage of. And I know we have different hours throughout the course of the week that you could avail yourselves of that, and also be in contact with people that have been a part of this very important ministry that we have here. It's new, and we're learning, and we're discovering many things about how we can be taking care of folks who are taking care of folks. And we're just so grateful for this lecture series that provides us the opportunity to really engage some of the very important steps along the way of our senior journey, and what resources that are available to us. And I am just so tickled to be able to introduce our speakers today from Tidewell Hospice. Hospice is a very important component in the journey that we get to join with people on as they make their way toward the end of life. And we have just really have appreciated the work of our hospice friends in providing the care and the love and the dignity that goes along with that period of time. And so I'm grateful that you're here to hear more about them and to learn about this very important service in our community. So without further ado, Callie Weber is for the manager of Tidewell Grief Care. She has been with Hospice, not just here in Sarasota, but earlier in Atlanta. And she has been a graduate of Agnes Scott College, got her MDiv from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and I guess you're right now completing your MSW, is that right? So she's got credentials, this lady, so we're very grateful for that. And she's a native of Florida, and so we're grateful that you are here, Callie. And then Kelly is the Community Partnership Specialist for Sarasota County at the Empath Tidewell Hospice. She is a graduate of Florida State University, and she is bringing awareness to our community about Tidewell Hospice. So without further ado, would you please welcome these two friends to our time here together.
Thank you. Is it okay? I'm just hungry. That's not a dog. No. Okay. Can everyone hear me on this? Testing? Okay, there we go. It's got to be kind of close, but I'm pretty loud because I'm Greek, so you'll hear me project. Hi, my name is Kelly Garrett. I am the Community Partnership Specialist at Tidewell Hospice. My job is to go out and educate the community about what Tidewell services we have to offer to our community, and also to build education and awareness about hospice and death and dying. It's always a difficult subject to talk about, but everyone here will have the same, we'll all pass at some point, so it's better to talk about it now and come up with plans and be educated about our services, so that if you ever need us, we are here to provide that to you. Most people tell me, I don't want to come talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. And I say, I know, but when you need us, you're going to want to know who we are. So today we're going to talk about Tidewell Hospice. Know us before you need us. Before we always start, we like to talk about our vision, our mission, and our values. So our vision, we are redefining healthcare as full life care. And our mission is to be unified in empathy. We are serving our communities through extraordinary full life care for all. And then our core values. We're eternally hopeful, confidently skillful. We are profoundly helpful, courageously impactful, and lovingly truthful. So today I hope to be courageously impactful to you. So some things to know. Tidewell. Tidewell is a nonprofit hospice organization. Our services are covered by Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance, and private pay. And if I speak too fast, please feel free to raise your hand and tell me to slow down. Our foundation, I love our Tidewell Foundation. They provide over $4 million to cover a multitude of non-reimbursed services, and we'll kind of get into that a little later. So we have been serving our community since 1980. To give you a little history about hospice, it originally started in London by a woman named Dame Cicely Saunders. And she was originally a social worker and decided to become a physician to be more heard by her colleagues, by other physicians. She believed in providing comfort care to people at end of life. So it came over to the United States around, I think it was 1962, I might be wrong on that exact date, and it came to Connecticut. So us in Sarasota, we became hospice, we had hospice services here in our community starting in 1980. So we weren't very far behind. We are the only nonprofit hospice organization here in Sarasota County. We also service Manatee, Charlotte, and DeSoto counties. I know lately you will probably see Empath Health. We became a part of Empath Health in 2021. What does that mean? We merged with Suncoast Hospice in Pinellas County, and we became together, and now we are an affiliate of Empath Health. So the reason we did that is because we wanted to provide full life care to all. We wanted to make sure that we weren't servicing just this small niche, that we were servicing you in all the stages of your life. So what is hospice care? What are our goals? Our goal is to provide comfort and support for people with life-limiting conditions by enhancing quality of life for our patients and for the people who care for them. So we recognize that not only is it the patient who is going through this, but it's the people who love them, who are around them, that are also dealing with this. We provide comfort and relief, not just physical. We don't just service the body physically, we service it emotionally, socially, and spiritually. And our whole job is to make sure that we are promoting dignity in your end of life. We prepare our patients and families at end of life. To give you some background on myself and why I became a part of hospice, Tidewell Hospice, is because I lost my mother. I lost my mother when I was 28 years old. I'm 37 right now. She had a brain aneurysm, and she started on palliative care, and then we ended up moving her into hospice. If I did not have hospice services, I would have felt very lost. They provided me not only the education, but the dignity to accept that this process was happening, and it's okay to feel that grief and go through that process. So they prepared me. There's often a large misconception that hospice and palliative care are the same things. They are not. They're very similar, but they are not the same. So palliative care is sometimes referred to as comfort care. It is specialized medical care for support for patients living with serious or life-limiting conditions. The focus is to relieve pain, symptoms, and stress during a serious illness and support families and patients through very difficult medical decisions in that time where they're trying to make those difficult medical decisions. What separates palliative from hospice is that patients can still seek curative treatment while on palliative care. So that is the largest difference. When you're on hospice, you're not seeking curative treatments anymore. How is our hospice care delivered? We look at our patient and our family as one whole unit. We want to make sure that we're not just, again, servicing the patient, but everyone that is a part of that journey. The care is provided regardless of your location where you're at. We take a team-membered approach, which means we have an interdisciplinary team, or we call it IDG, which is our acronym. IDG is a whole wheel, which we'll kind of get into on the next slide, of all of our team members coming together to make sure you get that full life care. Our hospice teams make regular visits to evaluate our patients and provide needed services. The beautiful thing about hospice is that we support you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter what time of day or night. You can always call us. So as I said before, our IDG team, we have this beautiful wheel right here. We have physicians, social workers, RNs, LPNs, certified nursing assistants, grief specialists, chaplains, and volunteers who are always a large necessity to us, and dietitians. So at the forefront, it's always our patient and our family. So we all come around to support you. Another beautiful thing that Tidewell offers is our complementary services, which I love, which is massage therapy, music therapy, pet therapy, aromatherapy, all different sorts of services in therapy. Our music therapy is provided by a master level music therapist. So when my mom was in the hospital and she was still on palliative care and we had just switched her over to hospice and she hadn't yet been switched to go home, we had a music therapist come in every day. And they would play music, any type of music. She brought a guitar, and I loved it. I was grieving deeply, and in my head, I had kind of thought, oh, this is so my mom can hear this music. What I didn't realize is it really touched my soul. I'll never forget, it was one day I was really struggling with what was happening, and the lady played Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, that song. And I will never forget it. It is forever ingrained in my memory. Every time I hear that song, I think of my mother. And it really did something very therapeutic to me. So these services may not seem like a lot on a slide, but when they're in action to our patients and their families, it is deeply touching, and it stays with you. It might play as I go. Support from our caring volunteers. Tidewell cannot do what we do without our volunteers. Actually, 5% of our staff has to be volunteers for the Medicare benefit. So they are vital to everything that we do. So if you're ever looking to volunteer, these are all the things that you can do to volunteer. You can provide respite, social support, you can run light errands, visual support. We have an amazing Tidewell Honors Veterans Program where we go out and we pin not only our patients, but veterans in the community, which I love that program. We want to honor them every day and say thank you for their services. We also have end-of-life doulas. I'm going to skip the video just in light of time. She just kind of is covering what I just said. So, sorry, Stacy, we're going to pass her. Don't tell her. Oh, it might go. No, I'm going past it. Okay. So who do we serve? Anyone who has an advanced illness who meets eligibility and requests hospice, regardless of your age, gender, ethnicity, diagnosis, your belief system, or even your financial system. Tidewell cares for all appropriate patients regardless of their ability to pay. It's something that makes us beautiful. We don't ever turn anyone away. That's the beauty of a nonprofit. We make it work for them. Who do we serve? So there's often a misconception in hospice that you can only use hospice if you have cancer. While cancer is a large part of our patients' served diagnosis, we also deal with cardiovascular disorders, neurological disorders, pulmonary, and a slew of other different types of diseases and disorders. So we're not here for one specific type of illness. We are here for you at any illness. Where do we provide care? That's often a question and also a misconception of where care is provided. We provide care wherever you call home. So that could be a long-term care facility, an assisted living, a private home, hospital, and sometimes our hospice houses. Our levels of hospice care. So, routine home care. 90% of our patients are served at home, wherever they call home, but we serve them at home. Like I said, the misconception is usually that if you're in that stage, you go to the hospice house to pass. That is actually a complete misconception. We do have hospice houses, but they are for crisis care, which we'll get into. But our routine home care, most frequently is delivered at home. Sometimes it's daily, weekly, semi-weekly. It just kind of depends on the patient's needs. It's not a written in stone, this happens for every single patient. We are looking at the patient and their family to make sure we get the appropriate care. Now, crisis care. That's caring for acute medical symptoms in the home with a continuous 8-hour to 24-hour shift. It's provided by a nurse during that brief period. So let's say that you had someone at home. For instance, my mom, when she finally came home, for the first couple of days, her pain, we were unable to manage it, and she was unable to be vocal. But you could tell she was in distress. So we did have a nurse for 2 days come and sit for about, I would say 9 hours a day. They weren't there the whole time. I was a certified nursing assistant at the time, so I was able to help a little bit more. And then we have our inpatient care. So let's say that nurse was unable to control my mom's symptoms. They would take a short-term care to one of our hospice houses or our inpatient units. Typically, that is for 5 days, but it can always be reevaluated after 5 days. So when medical needs cannot be met at home, your pain or your symptoms, we will bring you to the hospice house just to give you more around-the-care services. And then we have respite care. By a show of hands, how many people in here have been or are a caregiver? Okay, a lot. So when you become a part of our hospice care, we do offer respite care. Let's say you have to go to a wedding and you don't want to leave your loved one and you feel nervous about leaving anybody with your loved one. We can bring them to our hospice houses for 5 days and provide that under the Medicare benefit. And I love that because, first of all, thank you for being caregivers and kudos to everybody who does it, because I have also been a caregiver many times and it is a difficult job and it is a thankless job and it is very hard to do and sometimes you need a break and that's okay. Oh, did I skip? No, okay. So I'll do the tour of our hospice house. I often say our hospice houses look like the Ritz or a really nice hotel, nicer than I could afford to stay in. They're beautiful, and they're made to feel like home. So there's a kitchen area, and there's a sitting area, and there's an area for kids to play. That's purposeful. We want it to feel like home. If you can't be at home, we want you to be comforted. So these are all of our different hospice houses. We have one in Arcadia, Bradenton, Lakewood Ranch, Port Charlotte, Sarasota, Venice, and we have one inpatient unit, Village on the Isles, which is in Venice. So real quick, I'm just gonna play this. Hopefully it's not too loud. It was really loud earlier. This is our Lakewood Ranch. Again, it's made to feel like that home setting. These are our living room areas and our kitchen areas. We now have a children's area. And it's made so that the whole family can come and sit at the tables and enjoy each other while in a very difficult situation. Another one of our family rooms on the opposite side. They mimic each other. A huge table to sit at for dinner, just so that if you don't want to leave, you don't have to. A kitchenette. And this is one of our rooms, which we have recliners, pull-out beds. It's made to feel like home. And we always often encourage everyone to bring blankets and pictures, things that feel like home. And all of these chairs recline, which is nice. Our bathrooms. This is our outside area where it's meant to kind of build those sensories so that you can hear the water flowing and you can feel the warmth of the sun. and all of these bricks here will eventually be covered with families who have donated with their names and their loved ones if they want. I love that. So that is Lakewood Ranch, and they're all very similar to that. All right. Again, like I said, it's a home-like setting. We have a clinical team on site 24 hours a day, and we have a physician who oversees it. So something I often hear is, I wish I had known sooner. When should you call to see if you meet this criteria or your family member does? If the person is seeking frequent ER visits, if you're having multiple hospital stays during a previous 12 period, if you have any type of terminal illness or end-stage disease, treatment is no longer working. If you're seeking quality over comfort. Often if the burden outweighs the treatment, you kind of know. And then the physician does determine it. However, if you're unsure, you can always call and we can send out someone to do an assessment, and then we can speak to the physician. I wish I had called sooner. Another thing we always hear. One of the things about hospice is there is a huge misconception that it's only utilized in the access of the last couple of weeks or even days. But truly, under the Medicare benefit, it's 6 months. 6 months of terminal or life-limiting condition prognosis. Sometimes you go into hospice, and because you're getting that whole wraparound full life care, your health improves. And you can graduate off of our services. And then if you decline, or if that person is declining, then we can bring them back on. So hospice doesn't mean the stigma of fear around talking about end of life. It doesn't mean that this means I'm going to die if I go onto hospice, which when my mom was in palliative care and I had to switch her to hospice, that was something I had to wrap my mind around. If we switched from palliative care, which was just providing her comfort while she was seeking treatments, to hospice, that means she's going to die. That was a hard thing to wrap my mind around. And my mom did pass, but sometimes we don't always know the outcome. Sometimes our bodies are stronger than we realize. So families believe that getting hospice is giving up on a loved one. That's not the case. We want to provide dignity in those end stages of life. The majority of hospice patients receive hospice care too late, and not at all. The average length of stay is 11 days, and you could have 180 days. And in those 180 days, we're preparing you. We're getting you ready and the patient ready for that transition into death. So we want to make sure that we get to those services as soon as we can. And again, it doesn't mean that means this is the outcome. Sometimes you can improve. Referrals are sometimes pushed to last days and hours before death, making it difficult to help patients and families. So if we're only in there for 2 days, we're not able to give you and your loved one that type of service that they need. One of the things I was given was a booklet that explained the transitions my mom would be going through while passing. And I'm so grateful I had that book and I read it, because my little brother did not read the book. So when my mom had what they call, I'm sorry, I'm missing the word, but it's almost like a rally. They rally kind of in their last 24 hours. Sometimes it could be in the last week or last days. My mom had a rallying moment, and it was with my little brother, who was struggling the most with losing my mom. And he had a full-blown conversation with her, and my mom was not speaking. So when he came out of the bedroom, I had just gotten there because I had taken a break because I was a caregiver. I had gotten there, and he was white-faced and like, Mom is getting better. She is okay. And I told him, you should read the book. And he's like, no. And then my mom started to decline pretty quickly after that. And I started providing her more comfort medications to keep her more comfortable because she was starting to get agitated. And he freaked out. He was like, you're killing her. You're not doing what's right for her. And I was like, please just read the book, because it will educate you. And if it wasn't for hospice, we would have all been freaking out like that, because it's very scary, to see your mom go through that. And then in her last day, they explained, what they call the death rattle. And I'm so glad I knew what that was, because it was A sound I will never forget, but if I didn't, again, have hospice services with us, I don't know how well I'd be right now. So we always want to break down those barriers. You know, those are the things that keep people from calling, these stigmas that are attached to death and dying. So, as I said, Cecile Saunders said, how people die remains in the memories of those who live on. And that is so true, because that person, once they pass, they're gone. And you are left with the memory of how they lived and also how they died. So we want to make sure that our family members are getting all the care that they need, which will lead me into understanding anticipatory grief with Callie Weber. So I'm going to have her come on up. Welcome. I just held that. Okay.
My voice does not carry, so if you need me to talk louder, I'm the exact opposite. Please let me know. So my name's Callie Weber, and I'm the director of Tidewell Grief Care, which provides a lot of grief services to the community. So we're going to talk a little bit about anticipatory grief, which is sort of a mouthful of terms. You know, for all of us that have loved ones, you know, there's an assumption about grief most of the time that it starts at the time of a loss. You know, when that person dies, that's when our grief starts. And for those of us that are caregivers, and I know most of you raised your hands, we know that's not true. Right? It usually starts at the time of symptoms or the time of diagnosis. I appreciate so much, Kelly, how much you were able to share your own story, because I think for us, like, there's a certain learning that comes along with being able to talk about our losses, and it helps make connections. Even for myself, my dad has Parkinson's, and when he was diagnosed, we noticed those physical changes with him, that he couldn't do the things that he once could do. And for us, that's when our grief began, at him starting to give up things that he wasn't who he was. And for all of us that are taking care of people, that is where grief starts. It is a very normal thing to grieve things in life. It's a very normal process, but it's something that we don't really talk about very much. And we grieve anything that's a loss. Anybody who's ever lost a job, that you've lost your keys, that you've lost even things. You know, there's a grief process that goes along with that. I still have this image of my husband. He lost his hard drive on his MacBook. And I still remember walking through the mall for his appointment to see if they could fix it. They couldn't fix it. Holding his computer and like this hunch to his shoulders and that was a thing, not a person. You just see that grief in the way you hold it in your body. And it affects our whole being. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's really misunderstood, though, of what grief is. Our culture, we don't talk very much about it. We kind of expect people to get over it and move on. We give people this invisible timeline of, oh, it's been 2 months. You should be fine by now. And we know it doesn't really work that way. I mean, I've lost my grandparents decades ago, and every holiday I still, when I see slippers in the mall for sale, I think about my grandmother because she gave me isotoner slippers every year for Christmas. You remember isotoners, the little ballet? Yeah, every year for Christmas I got with the little bow on the front, but every time I see them, I think about her. And that's my own grief. It's still with me decades later. So, but knowledge of grief and how it works can really help us. I think the call that I get the most often is, am I going crazy? This is what I'm, no, you're not. But it can feel that way if all of your feelings and your emotions are kind of all over the place, which is normal in grief. So we're going to talk particularly just about anticipatory grief today. The biggest thing is that sort of loss of future. So whenever you get a diagnosis, a big one, you lose all those plans that you had. And for most of us, we work really hard in our lives to save up that, the bank account. We save, we work really hard to get to retirement, to get to this place. And then, boom, you get a diagnosis and things can change. And so all those things you hoped for, you planned for, you saved for, can change significantly. Milestones that you wanted to see, that you wanted to happen. And I realize in talking about this is really painful things to lose these pieces of us and our people. So if you get tearful, don't worry, it's a safe place, right? But milestones that will not be seen, those big pieces, those big things that we want to see in the future. And grief is not just we think about the person that was diagnosed, that's one person, but it's all the people around that person that grieve too. It's very much part of a whole system of people. Anybody that's watching that person change is grieving, and that we're all going through this process. And it's also that loss of future roles and who we will be in this world, that all of that changes a lot. So, and also loss of expectations of who we hope in the world we will be, they will be. It's a lot of things. This was, for my grandfather, this was a big part of his grief journey, was who am I now? So he was always that patriarch in our family. He was that guy that he knew all the answers to everything. He knew where every socket wrench was, everything was. And as he started to lose that, that was a huge thing for his own identity, that he struggled. And he was of that generation that you don't talk about feelings. So you could tell he struggled with it, but mostly it came out as anger. But he really struggled with that, who am I now? And then who are you now? Even for my grandmother in this situation, so he was struggling with who he was. Well, my grandmother was struggling now being, who is she now? That the relationship is totally different than the way it used to be. So it really can kind of mess with who you have identified with for your whole life as being this person. Any former nurses in here? Or healthcare people? No. Yeah. You guys like to fix things. And so, social worker? Yeah, but sometimes it's hard if you're used to being in that role that you can't fix things. And so it's part of your identity to be able to, you see this problem, you fix it. For some people, that really changes who you are. So again, it changes the whole system in your family, your whole family system, whoever you identify as being part of that family. And sometimes, the strong becomes weak and the weak becomes strong. That's a really big struggle for folks, to suddenly be the recipient of care or someone to be the caregiver. So you see all these big shifts and changes that happen. Loss of roles. Roles often reverse with caregiving. So you might find yourself as you're the person in your family system who's always taken care of everybody else, and suddenly you're the person being cared for. That can be a really tough role too. Generational shifts. For any of you who have taken care of a parent, that can be a really difficult journey too. You find yourself doing things with your parent you never thought that you would do. Things that they did for you when you were a child, and suddenly you're doing these things for them, feeding them, clothing them, bathing them. That's a really surreal place for a lot of folks to be. And so all these things I'm talking practically, but there's a feeling side to all this loss too. Again, those gender role changes, sometimes, people's gender role shifts in terms of what the expectations are. And especially even in my house, we have certain tasks that we do. I hate to unload the dishwasher. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. My husband does it for me every day. I love that. He doesn't like to load it, so we make a pretty good team. But I know that there might come a day when those role changes will shift, and those places we serve in our system might change. But that's, again, I'm just talking about the dishwasher. There's so many things in life and pieces. That independence versus dependence, of suddenly not longer being able to be that independent person that we once were. I know for folks, like driving is such a big thing, and it's such a big thing to have to give up your keys when it comes to that time. And some people hand over those keys much more readily than others. My same grandmother, she was fiercely independent. She lived to be 96. And would not give up her keys. She had several little fender benders in parking lots, and finally she eventually hit my dad in his car, and she just got out and just kind of went like this, and that was it. And she was fortunate that nothing big happened, but it was so hard for her to do that, to give up that independence. And for a lot of folks, giving up that freedom to be able to go out into the world, it's a huge loss for people. Those hopes and dreams, all those, again, those things that we hoped for, that we wanted to see. And COVID took some of this from some people. Think about, we almost hit pause for 3 years. So I know especially for my in-laws, I would say the go-go years in terms of their retirement, they lost 3 years of being able to go. And so there might be trips now that they didn't get to take. There might be other experiences that they didn't get to see, those milestones that you might not have. But all those hopes and dreams are really big because they're important to us, of things that we wanted to see on our list. And the list just sort of goes on when we think about all these different places to grieve and to lose different pieces of ourselves. And the biggest one, I think, too, is time. Some of us had expectations for what our life will be. When I referenced my grandmothers, they both lived to their 90s. So that's sort of my expectation in my head. Is that real? Maybe not. But I think all of us have that image of we're going to get to be this age. We're going to get to this milestone. And that when that doesn't happen, where's the fairness in that? So it can create a lot of grief there too of I thought I was going to have this much more time, or it would look like this. So you see there's a lot to this sort of grief process that we don't always really talk about. So grief, it's one of those things that we carry any stress in life in our bodies. That's the first thing. So if you look at this list, you might think this is like a symptom list almost for having a heart problem or something like that. But these are all normal things that happen just to our bodies. We'll get to the other side of it. These are things that just happen to our bodies that you can tell how we sort of hold on to all these things. Of course, if you're experiencing any of these symptoms, please call your doctor or go to the emergency room. But it is normal to feel that, at least for me, I carry my stress right here, to feel that tightness in my chest or in my neck, or feel like you're carrying the weight of the world with you. All of that can be symptoms of grief. Even stomach ache, headaches, those sort of things are part of our grief journey. The other behaviors, the biggest one I think that gets upset is your sleep. If you're caregiving too, and the person's in your home, that can also upset your sleep. It's almost like you're keeping that extra ear open for them to make sure they're okay. You just don't sleep as deeply as you once did before. Or even if your loved one's in a facility, you're always listening for that phone to ring. And in the middle of the night, phone calls are never good. But it's one of those things that our sleep is often disturbed. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and just can't go back to sleep. Your mind's just doing cartwheels. That is a big one that often is a big part of grief. Appetite disturbances. So usually folks, nothing tastes good. For some people, they might notice, their weight go down because just nothing tastes good, nothing feels good. Some people are the opposite, these are my people, but you're going for comfort. Everything that feels good tastes good, and we don't usually go for grief broccoli. We go for French fries and sweets and comfort food, the things that feel good. So it is common often to see weight gain in that. Really a very normal thing because you're taking on everything and just trying to make yourself feel better. The same with even appetite disturbances, but it's something to pay attention to. A lot of people go to substance use, something to pay attention to. That one glass of wine to sort of relax you into the end of the night can become 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you realize, oh my goodness, I'm self-medicating through this. So it's just something to pay attention to, but very common because you don't want to feel what you're feeling. And so that extra dopamine in your body can help. But in the end, you're going to end up with a headache, and also it's still going to be there in the morning. So just something to pay attention to. Loss of interest in activities. That's another one. You might find yourself sort of pulling back from the things you normally enjoyed, or not wanting to go to events because you don't want to talk about the same thing over and over again of what your life is like as a caregiver. Really common too. You're just not enjoying things that you once did. Even pulling back from family and friends can happen. Also that monkey mind, those restless activity, you can't stop spinning or worrying about things. Very common too as a caregiver, and in grief of just kind of spinning and worrying about things. Absent-minded behavior. So walking into a room and thinking, where are my keys? Anybody do that? It's okay, admit it, it's okay. And it happens with age, but it happens too in grief. You've got so many things going on and you're trying to grapple with this huge diagnosis of someone or of yourself. Very common to forget things, to forget details, to forget appointments. Because you're just kind of struggling to grapple with this huge presence, this huge thing that's in your life now. So I always remind folks, be very careful when you're driving, because it's easy, well, in Florida, period, but also, it's so important to be careful when you're driving because it's so easy to get distracted. You're thinking about getting to that doctor's appointment and, things can happen. So that absent-minded behavior is very real. Again, the social withdrawal, sort of pulling back from family and friends. You feel like you might burn people out. Sometimes folks actually lose friends during this process too, because some friends are like, they can't take on that feeling. You kind of learn who your friends can swim in the deep end with you, and those that are more shallow end friends. And you learn those people that are in it with you that know what it's like. And so hang on to those people when you find them. Sighing and crying, of course, very typical. That's usually what we associate with grief, is tears. Some folks aren't crying, they're functioning and they're getting by. Both are really normal, so don't think I'm not crying enough, I'm crying too much. You're doing you, and that's really what it is. There's a lot of normal in grief. So crying and sighing are very normal. And the ebb and flow. So you might have good days, you might have some bad days. You might have a stretch of good days and then a stretch of bad days. It doesn't mean you're doing anything right or wrong. Both are very common to feel that sort of roller coaster. And also, if you're caring with someone that has sort of a progressive illness, like with each loss along the way, you might experience some more symptoms. You might notice some more tears. I know for my dad, who I mentioned, who has Parkinson's, he called me the last day that he played golf. That was a huge thing for him. So he worked his whole life. He was a dentist. He loved playing golf. That was his thing. And he called, and he could still play. He still can play. He can't win, and that's he's more competitive than he is loving golf. So when he got to the point where he couldn't win like he did, he couldn't do it anymore. And so, but that was a big day for him. That last day, he put those clubs in the closet and said, "Today's the day." But that was a huge point of grief for all of us because that was such a part of his identity. So my tears came that day. His tears came that day. He still rides his bike, so he's still pretty active. But certain things, just there are those waves of grief that come along these journeys. And again, with each step along the journey, those symptoms can come back. So again, you're not crazy. So what helps? So what can we do? The biggest thing is just telling your story and talking about it. You might notice that other folks might feel uncomfortable about it. Again, those are your shallow end people. We're going to find the deep end people that really can talk. I imagine most of the folks in this room that are going to show up to a presentation on hospice care are probably your deep end people. But there are people out there that are willing to have these conversations. And when you find them, talk to them. Share your story. For most of us, it does help to be able to talk about how we're doing. And if we're listening to people that are going through it, we're not judging. We're just listening to where they are. And sometimes the feelings and the logic of it, sometimes we can get angry at the person we're caregiving for. A very normal thing to do. But people might hear that and be like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe they're mad at this person." And it's like, yeah, it's human and it's normal. But finding a space where you can really talk without that judgment piece is really important. So having that space and finding your people that you can talk to. For those two that are supporting caregivers, sometimes just showing up and doing the thing is the most important thing. So rather than just telling someone who's caregiving, "Oh, you give me a call if you need anything," show up with dinner at their house. Showing up and doing those tasks are really incredibly helpful. Taking someone flowers, texting them, calling them, just saying, "How are you doing?" Inviting those conversations. Those are the most supportive things that we can do for each other in this. So to tell you a little bit about sort of what falls under my umbrella. So actually, I'm not really with hospice so much. We're part of Tidewell Grief Care, which is one of those programs that's paid for by the foundation. So the team that I lead takes care of folks that are grieving outside of the hospice program. We do have grief counselors. So if you are on the hospice program and are struggling with your loss and need to process your grief, we have those folks. So our team takes care of folks outside of hospice. So if you lost someone unexpectedly, but also if you're struggling with a difficult diagnosis, we provide that support as well too. Everything is totally free. So we don't charge for anything in grief care, whether you see a counselor individually, you go to a support group, everything is totally free. So we don't charge, and we do offer individual appointments. So sometimes folks might say, "I just need a space where I can talk about how I'm really doing." And that's what we do. We give education, but also just schedule those one-on-one appointments. We also have a caregiver group. Right now it's by Zoom, which we find actually really helpful for folks that can't make it in person to an office, because when you're caregiving, it's hard sometimes to get out, with other symptoms that might be going on, so we keep that by Zoom. But we do have counseling offices for our program that are in Ellington, here in Lakewood Ranch, which is at the corner of University and Lakewood Ranch Boulevard. And we also have an office in Northport. But we can also do phone or Zoom if that's more convenient for folks. But most people don't know that we offer counseling ahead of hospice. So it's something to keep in mind that if you feel like you need that or you feel like someone else needs it, you can kind of plant that seed of, I know where someone might get you. We also do a lot of community outreach. So we go to businesses and schools and do sort of crisis interventions too, especially if they've lost an employee or something like that and they need a sort of space where their staff can talk about how they're doing, or in the school setting too. If they might have lost a child or a parent might have lost a child, to be able to go in and provide support for the community as well. And then we have to do a lot of education and outreach, kind of like these events. But we also have partnerships with the Alzheimer's Association to do support groups and other sort of care and things like that. This is sort of our contact information. So if you're interested, go to the website, you can send an email. We've got brochures out front. So if you're interested in getting some of this support, I feel like you need it. Again, it's for that difficult diagnosis or if you've had a loss outside of hospice. I think that's it. So if either you have questions, I love questions, so feel free, even weird ones. So Kelly or myself can field any questions you might have, and here comes Pat with her microphone.
Great, and I'm going to run the mic because we're recording this, so it's important that the audience hears your questions as well. Thank you, ladies, first of all. We appreciate it. Questions for either Callie or Kelly? I have lots of questions. I didn't want to start. I wanted to give you guys a chance. Is there anything that comes to mind right away?
Feel free to ask any question.
Yes.
If I can talk.
So my husband has, it's called mild cognitive impairment, but we're going down the road of dementia. He's actually a lot better than he could be, might be. But I'm just starting to realize that that's actually a diagnosis that we can trigger, a hospice referral for. I don't feel like we're ready for it yet. But can you talk a little bit about things to look for to trigger that referral?
I can talk loud. Okay. I'll talk super loud. So typically the rule of thumb is is he under physician's care? Yeah. Okay. I would have a conversation with his physician originally and see kind of how he feels with his health and if it's declining substantially to a point where he feels like it might warrant hospice, to make sure that he has those. It's usually if the doctor comes to him and says his health is declining so significantly that I think, in the next 6 months we might be looking at end of life, then that would be a time to call us. However, I will say that if you feel like you don't want to have that conversation with your doctor right away and you just kind of want to see, we have an amazing care navigation team. And so now that we are affiliates with Empath Health, we have additional services that we can offer that is not just hospice, like our palliative care. And we have medical services, we have personal care, home health, things of that nature to kind of help be the middle piece before you get to that area. So I can give you my card. I also have a flyer that is like a 1-800 number to, like I said, our phone lines are serviced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can kind of help. They'll go through some assessments with you and an assessment and kind of ask you specific questions. And based off of that, they'll kind of guide you to what care they feel like would be best fit for you and your family.
Okay, so to repeat that, there is a phone number to call.
Yes.
If someone wants to learn more about what path are we on.
Correct.
And is palliative care possibly the interim before we get to? Most people understand that it's a life-altering diagnosis, right? But they have no idea how much time that's going to take.
Right.
But if they're looking to expand their level of care and get more support, calling that number is the way to go?
Yes.
Okay.
And to add to that, let's say, he has a longevity of life, long prognosis, and that's what we want. Obviously, we want him to get the most out of his life. So even if he doesn't qualify, now palliative care can be sought anytime seeking curative treatments during curative treatments or any type of serious illness. We don't treat chronic illness, chronic pain, but any type of serious illness, it'd be worth calling. But even if it's not for that type of specific care, let's say you just need somebody to come into the home a couple of days a week to help him cook or brush his hair. It's something so simple, I know, because we all take such advantage of that and take that for granted because we're able to do those things. But when we're not able to do those things, and you're the only one able to do that for him, those services would be a good fit for you or for anyone. So even if it doesn't fit within the realm of hospice or palliative care, Sam's here. Sam McKee, she is my mentor and trainer, and she has been the person who has brought me on. So if I can't answer it, she can. Not to push any pressure on you. But so if any of those services might be a good fit for you, it would be good to call our care navigation team. So not just for hospice, but we have a ton of different services that we can offer.
All right, and here comes my questions. I'm going to delve deeper. What I heard you also say is you don't necessarily have to have a recommendation from a doctor who is treating your loved one. If you have a feeling that there might be more care available to you, you don't have to go ask your doctor, do you think my loved one is ready for hospice? We can call you and get educated on an individual basis. Is that correct?
That is, but ultimately we do have to have a physician's referral for hospice care. But initially, to do the initial assessment, you can just call directly and self-refer.
Okay.
And we do have our own doctors, yes.
Okay. So if you were to come out and do an assessment and in fact say, yeah, I think we probably could help you here, does the individual who has called you need to involve your own doctor care then at that point?
Our hospice team can actually reach out on behalf of the patient and their family, or it can be a group discussion where you can schedule a meeting so that you are all there to have that discussion.
Right. Yeah. Right.
What about if you exceed the 6 months care?
Are you saying after you become on hospice services and you exceed? That's that beautiful thing. If we are able to provide these full life care, these wraparound services that improve your health, and you are not, let's say you go a year, we are able to either reevaluate you and keep you on service if you are still at like a slightly steady decline, but if you're improving significantly, we can graduate you off of our services temporarily, and then if the health starts to decline after that, we can bring you back onto service.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. It's an opinion when you first evaluate that end of life is going to come within 6 months.
Yes, and there are they sort of, keep an eye on you all along. So there are certification periods that happen in your hospice care. And so they constantly are evaluating, making sure that you're appropriate for services. So it does happen sometimes that folks graduate and leave hospice, but oftentimes folks are on for longer than 6 months. If they can document steady changes that justify you being with hospice, sometimes that happens. Even I think about, in my mind still, is like Jimmy Carter, several weeks ago was diagnosed and was placed on hospice care, probably living a lot longer than a lot of people would have expected. 2 months, I see some home 2 months. That's longer than the national average. Like we shared, the average length of stay for us is about 11 days. That's a lot longer than that, but he's still, as far as we know, on hospice care. That's very common for some people, that they stay on for a longer period of time.
I met a man the other day who said his wife has been on hospice services for 3 years. So yeah. He was happy to say that, because he really appreciated the services, but he was also very happy that she exceeded that 6 months.
Okay, so I have another question, because with my mother, I was one of those that didn't call hospice in until like the last 4 days. But I'm an occupational therapist. I've worked in home care. So part of it was I knew what to do. Part of it was she was great until the last 4 days.
Right.
And I just needed help with that. But one of my fears with calling in hospice sooner was my home health mentality of homebound. And I was afraid that we couldn't go and do, because that last year we lived the bucket list full out.
You can still go and do.
And that's what I wasn't sure, and so I just wanted you to speak to that, because I'm afraid, other people might have that same.
Can I answer this? We have patients that travel all the time, that still have things on their bucket list that they want to do. And so if you have this dream of going to New York City one last time, sometimes what they'll do is actually a transfer. So they'll transfer you to a hospice in New York. So if anything happens during your stay, that hospice up there can provide care during that time until you get back in our service area. Happens all the time. Because we want people to be able to live their lives, that it's not this sentence where you have to stay in your home.
That was the criteria for getting chemo, because it was palliative, it wasn't curative.
Correct.
And it's like, okay, but we're going on a cruise, is that okay?
Yeah.
So, right. You want to remember, when you become onto hospice, you are no longer seeking curative treatment, and we want to make sure that we are providing quality of life. So if we want to make sure that we provide dignity in your end stages of life.
Yeah, if you check out the Tidewell
Oh,
website,
skydiving.
there was a guy, I paid one of our patients recently that went skydiving. And so if you're able to do those
We want
things,
you to live your life.
Yeah. that's not gonna
Well, her favorite thing was, can I have a martini? I'm like, what's it gonna do? Kill you? She goes, good point. I'll have to."
Please, yes. 2, 3, whatever you need. You know, we want to make sure. You know, it's an odd way to say it, but it is a special time in your life, her life, and you know, you only get one. So
I encouraged her to, take the time to talk about the hard stuff.
yes.
With me, but with my siblings as well. And I know when it came to that moment, the hospice nurse, we had a family meeting in the kitchen, and when they all left, she was like, "How are you? Because your family is so well prepared for this."
Oh, yes. Education helps.
I have a question. You mentioned respite care. Do you need to be signed in for palliative care to be offered that respite care? Or is this something that you offer before somebody signs into palliative care?
So actually, our respite is offered to our hospice patients' families. So that respite care is specifically geared to our hospice patient and their families. So once you come onto service for hospice, not palliative, because palliative is more for comfort care while you're seeking curative treatment, the hospice is for quality of care towards your end of life, and you're no longer seeking curative treatment, we are able to provide that respite to you.
Home health. So if you're part of, home health or the personal care services, they can assist with respite, but it's not a benefit like it is with the hospice benefit. So 5 days of respite is covered under the Medicare, Medicaid benefit for hospice.
Sorry, you can go on to hospice 6 months? Okay, then I'm...
180 days, the Medicare benefit covers
Okay.
that. Which is great, because even though, for instance, your mom, she was doing great until those 4 days. But the beautiful thing is, like I said earlier, is our services are not just for the patient; they're for the family too. And even though I know you were, gung ho and killing it out there, doing a great job, it's great to have somebody say, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on with mom? You guys are good? Okay, well, come back next week." It's just a check-in. So it's 180 days. And that it's so important to get those services in as soon as possible so that you're not in crisis trying to make those decisions. It's really important because our bodies naturally go into that fight or flight mode, and we aren't making the steady decisions we need to. So to think about it ahead of time, just like you plan for anything in your life, you plan your estate, you plan for trips, you plan for all of this, it's important to plan for our end of life. It's very important.
The other benefit too is you build relationships with your care team, right? You get to know the nurses, the CNAs, the grief counselor, the chaplain. They get to know your loved one, and a story was shared this morning on one of our interdisciplinary groups where one of our volunteers became so close with a patient that she knew the patient's favorite candy bar, and without fail, every week showed up with that candy bar, right? It's those little things that just make it so much special, so much more special. So the earlier the admission, the better. And also, if you are a caregiver with a medical background, you need that respite though too. You need that support. You need to be able to know that your nurse is going to be there. This is a good time for you to go to the grocery store and just walk every aisle.
Right. And so under personal care and home health, those services are provided. They're just provided with insurances instead of the benefit.
Okay. I have 2 questions, I think. Number 1, did I understand that correctly? If you have someone in hospice, does the physician with hospice take over rather than the whatever family doctors or other doctors the patient had?
Our physicians oversee, but they do work and keep in contact with your primary care physicians and such.
Okay.
But you get more of a group team surrounding you. But they will keep in contact. But our physicians do oversee the hospice care.
Okay. So we both have, our parents are pretty old, almost 101 and 93. So, but they both have dementia and completely different types. And I have read that a lot of times it's just very hard to determine when they're truly end of life. And so how do you mitigate that? Or
It would start, I would say, first with a conversation with your physician or their physicians. Also, as a family, it's important to have those discussions. If you see a decline in their health, they're not moving as much, they're going to the ER a lot, they're not eating and drinking as much, they've lost their ability to thrive in life. Those types of slow declines. I remember my yaya, which is Greek for grandma, she had dementia also. And both my parents and my aunts and uncles, everybody took a turn and tried to help her. But in the end, we ended up having to put her in an assisted living facility. And at first she was fine. She might put pink eyebrows on instead of brown, and she might try and escape. But ultimately she was okay. But slowly over time, just from, common knowledge of, the decline of health, you could see she was less active. She wasn't eating as much. She wasn't getting up to use the restroom anymore. Those are certain signs that kind of signal you to, hey, we need to have a discussion. And if you're not sure, it's always good to call and at least get an assessment.
Can you say a little bit more about if someone, a caregiver, calls you and asks for an assessment, what that would typically look like, and based on the assessment made, where that would leave the caregiver?
Okay.
It's a great question. So
that is a good question.
If they call, they're going to do some of their medical history, maybe get some records, some of their recent hospital stays, things like that, talk to their doctor, talk to the family and get what their feedback is, and then actually do a physical assessment of that patient and determine if they're eligible for hospice services. If they're not, that's also a time when they might give you some more education about, again, these are some things to look for. And you can also be redirected to Care Navigation, which is a great program that kind of offers some support. It's kind of like pre-hospice, but it's someone calling to check on you, again, reminding you of signs and things to look for, but also offering you that support of helping you transition when it's time. So it never hurts to ask, but it is sort of an evaluation, and they look at your medical records, blood work, lab work, things like that to see if you qualify.
So you come where the loved one is, and you give the caregiver some idea of what kinds of records they need to have available and contacts.
Go ahead.
Most of the time they'll do that work, like the hospice team will do a lot of that work for you. They'll come to you. It's not like you have to bring them somewhere or do all these things. They try to make it as easy on you as the family as possible.
So it usually starts with a phone assessment, and then if they feel it meets these certain criteria, they'll come out and do a physical assessment. Did you have a question?
I have a friend who's a young lady. She's going to be 51 this weekend. She's had bone cancer and breast cancer for a couple of years now. She's on Medicaid. Could she qualify for these kind of services?
Go ahead. So Medicaid and Medicare will cover that benefit.
Okay. Doesn't matter the age, right?
No.
So, okay.
Because unfortunately,
all right. Well, she's in Pinellas County, so do you know what kind of organization is there for contact?
so our affiliate is Empath Health. So up there in that area, because think of it as an umbrella, we have Empath Health, and then we have Tidewell Hospice, and then in Pinellas, Hillsborough, we have Suncoast Hospice, and we have a couple other areas. So in Pinellas, it would be Suncoast Hospice. I can give you my card, and then if you want to reach out to me, I can point you in the right direction.
Just remember, hospice would be an option for her if she's no longer seeking curative treatment.
Yeah, well, she's not given up yet. So would they have palliative care?
Palliative care would be a good option through our medical services, but if she's seeking curative treatment, hospice wouldn't be the
Right. Yeah, but she could have.
Care Navigation would be a great person to call, which oversees all of our programs and will guide her into the right direction.
Okay, and you give me a number for that then.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You do raise a great question about there's no age requirement for hospice, unfortunately, just that 6 months or less. So unfortunately, we do get pediatric patients all the way through, even your hundreds. Yeah.
And that's where being the nonprofit piece really comes in, because hospice is a Medicare, Medicaid benefit. If someone, like our pediatric patients, don't necessarily qualify for that benefit, our foundation steps in with charitable care. And I believe this last year we provided over $2 million in charitable care alone to our 4-county area. So that's anyone who doesn't qualify for the benefit, children, various different situations.
Oh, and I forgot to add that we also do like a Make-A-Wish for anybody who is on hospice. So if you wanted to take that trip, you would
jump
love
out of an airplane.
Yeah. Yes.
The Wishes Fund will help you. My favorite one to this day is a patient. All they wanted was a daiquiri from Daiquiri Deck. we made it happen.
That's
right?
easy, yeah.
Weddings, we've thrown weddings.
Yes.
I mean, just endless stories of the wishes that we've been able to help families have with their loved ones.
For personal care services, what type of insurance coverage
It would
do
be
you
private
accept?
insurance.
Okay.
Private insurance would cover that. And I have some pamphlets on that as well with me, so I can grab all that.
I don't have a question, but I do have something that's very dear to my heart. My mother was in hospice, and as it went on Thursday, it was a hospice nurse said to me, "It's going to be this weekend." Then that night, our pastor came to see her, and after he left, all she kept saying to me is, "I want to go see my father. I want to go see my father." The next day, she had the rally. I got home from work, and my sister was babysitting her, and she said to me, "Let me out of here. She's going crazy today." She was just going to go. She didn't care where she was going. She was going to go. Next day, on that Thursday also, when the nurses told me that it was going to be this weekend, my mother was doing a thing with her fingers on the blanket, and she said, "This is going to be it." And so the next day, Saturday morning, when I woke up, she was comatose, and she died Sunday morning. And it was so good to have that, because then Thursday, I was able to call my brother and said, "You need to come right now." His decision was different, but that's beside the point. I knew almost to the minute when it was going to happen, and it was great.
Thank you for sharing that. It is an amazing privilege to be able to be educated with that information so that it isn't so traumatic. Losing someone, regardless of how it's explained to you, it's traumatic, it's difficult. But we like to ease that so you're not in a crisis moment while you're losing them, so you can absorb every last moment you need with them. I felt that same exact way in those. And my mom did the same thing with the sheets, and she was pulling and tugging, and the nurse said, I'm gonna stay." And I said, "You can stay all day, but my mom is waiting for my brother to come," and she was driving from Tallahassee, and it was a couple hours after he showed up that she passed. So the education is really beneficial, and that's one of the beautiful things that people don't realize that is offered to you when you're going through these difficult times that hospice can offer. And that's why we don't want you to wait till the last days, because we want to, like I said, not only prepare the patient, but prepare you, because you're the ones who are left with the grief to deal with and process. And same with dealing with anticipatory grief. It's very important to know that those feelings as you're coming into these stages is normal in this situation. So.
The book you mentioned that they gave you, is that available, that we could keep it in our library for people who wanted to read that?
Yes, actually, I was just talking to one of my colleagues about that, and she said they have quite a few still. So I could find those, and I'm sure the blue book that kind of tells you about...
Or the patient and family guide.
Yes.
The spiral bound patient and family guide, or the book
that's
that I made?
I think we have a couple of books. We'll figure out which one and we'll bring them to you.
I think having that available in our library would be very valuable. so that people could just check it out, read it, put it back. I think that education doesn't happen early enough.
Yes.
And again, yeah, I think it would be a great ad if we could even get a couple of the books.
Right.
That'd be really important.
Books, pamphlets, cards.
Right.
It's good having those resources as opposed to going to Google, because if you go to Google, you're going to find anything, and it's good going to resources that you can trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You always end up going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's not a good place.
And then it's never.
A lot of people know enough about hospice to be dangerous because they've heard it all from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you can't do this because of that, or you must do that because of this, and this is and they won't let you, it's usually more to the story. So education, right?
Knowledge is power, 100%. And I believe that so deeply in my soul, I can't explain it. And I feel like that is such a good thing to say. And the other thing I wanted to add to that is that, let's say you come onto hospice services and you're like, this isn't for us. You can come off hospice services. You're not signing a contract. This is your choice. We want to provide you and your family the dignity to make the choices for the life that you want to live and for how you'd like to end. So it's your life, and it's your family's life, and it's your decisions, and it's always in your hands and your control.
And I will add, if you are going to go to the internet to start seeking some answers and say you want to, explore around, I highly recommend going to nhpco.org. That's the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. They are a fantastic body. They do a lot of work throughout the entire country, working with for-profit and non-profit hospice organizations and palliative care organizations. They are a wealth of resources and information. You can see hospice rankings, national ratings and rankings based on Medicare feedback. It's fantastic resource.
Yes.
Can you just repeat that?
nhpco.org.
nhpco.org.
Okay, everybody got that?
A lot of nhpco.org.
Awesome. All righty. And we'll add that site to our 2 computers in the Resource Center so that you can just click right on that. Thank you, ladies.
Yes. Something that wasn't brought up, but when my husband was in hospice, he didn't go out to a physician for the reason he was in hospice, but he was still able, he had macular degeneration, so he was still able to see his retinal specialist and get his shots to keep his vision going.
Well said. You're correct. So again, we want that quality of life. We want to make sure that you're comfortable. So if you have diabetes and you need an insulin shot, we're not going to be like, you can't have that. We want to make sure that we're not making you suffer, not making you feel uncomfortable. We want to make sure that you are given anything that's going to help you sustain any type of medical illnesses that you would have just for those types of things, as long as it's not curative treatments. So that's just to sustain your general health.
Is everybody comfortable with the curative versus non-curative? Everybody cool on that? Okay, very good. Any other questions? Going. The ladies, I'm sure, will stay a little bit after if you have some personal questions. Can we have a round of applause for these 2 wonderful women? Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this conversation with you. Thank you so much. Got it. Oh, and that's our contact information. We also have cards, or I don't know if you have cards with you, but I have cards, she has cards, and additional pamphlets. So let me know, please. I brought my whole box of all different things. Whoa, yep, good call.
And there's lots of information out on the table as you came in.
I do that all the time. I do that. Pictures, you can always go back to the picture,
Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you so much.